Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Simply Fit. I'm your host, Sandy White. And on today's segment, we're going to be talking to Dr. Miles Nichols. He's got a lot of juicy information, but remember, we changed our platform. So don't get mad if you don't get all the information from him. We can always invite him back. And remember also, the reason for this platform is to remind you guys that we do simple tips and strategies to help you guys overcome suicide and depression. And we're on a mission to save 1 million lives. So with that being said, this is one of the reasons why we have invited Dr. Nichols on, is so he can give you guys more information on little tidbits on how you can recognize when you're in the, I don't want to say what I'm about to say, but I'm about to say it, danger areas. All right. So I am going to give you guys a little bit about Dr. Miles Nichols, and then he's going to come on and share some more information with you guys. So he is a functional medicine doctor. He works with individuals that basically deal with neuropathy or cognitive decline, and anything that I share, if it's incorrect, he'll correct me. And those areas fall into mental health, neurological concerns such as depression, anxiety, chronic fatigue, brain fog, headaches, and migraines. So jump in here, Dr. Miles. We appreciate you coming on the show, and just share a little bit about why you are so passionate about this area of health.
Sandy, thank you so much for having me on. And I am really passionate about this area of health for a variety of reasons. I have my own personal story that fits into why I'm passionate about this, where I was struggling deeply in my early 20s with chronic fatigue and brain fog and having a hard time getting through school. I also really feel passionate about this because my heart goes out to people who I treat in the clinic on a regular basis, who are feeling like they've lost hope and feeling like there is no reason to go on. And that is so touching to me that people feel that way. And I have a sense that that's not necessary in all cases. And so that with the right information, with the right tools, with the right support, resources, and help, that a lot of that doesn't have to be so significant and heavy for people. And I really have myself as a mission. I just finished an online summit called Microbes and Mental Health to really help to educate people about what are some of the things that people aren't talking about so much in relation to mental health that might be areas that you could find out about, learn about, research about, understand more about, and that if you were to be able to, could make a big difference in your own mental health. So for me, it actually came a little bit as a byproduct. Like I started working on chronic illness and I started working on things that were a little more physiological in nature. And little by little, people started to say, oh, my anxiety's getting better. My depression's getting better. I'm experiencing better mood. And I didn't know why that was at first, because I was treating things like infections and toxins and gut problems. But little by little, I started to realize there's a lot of research about the gut-brain connection, about things like inflammation due to infections or toxins, and what's called neuroinflammation and changes in the brain and mental health. So that led me down a rabbit hole of research of trying to figure out, well, research is saying these neurochemical imbalances are the cause for depression, but is that true? And it turns out it's actually not very true. And there's some other causes that are more research backed than the neurochemical cause of things like low serotonin and depression. So that got me really excited and wanting to share with people and educate the community about some of the misinformation out there and some of the opportunities for being able to identify and understand root causes that have been largely overlooked in the medical and research communities up until this point.
So without sounding like I'm going to ask you a mouthful, but if you get to know me, you know I talk a lot. What are some, I don't know if I could say basic, but you mentioned a key word, root cause, because we see the byproduct, but what's causing all of this? What can people, maybe like 5 or 6 tips, because I know it's a lot more that they can pay attention to say, oh, when I see, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I need to contact somebody like Dr. Nichols.
Yeah. So what I'll say is that there is a lot, and we can't, of course, have the time to get into everything, but I'll say that when I do a case history with the person, when I'm talking to them, some of the things I'm looking for to identify some of these root causes, I'll just, without going into the details of the research, I'll say that some mental health issues start after infections. Someone could get an infection and have behavior or mood changes after that infection. And there is research showing how an infection can trigger an autoimmune response against brain tissue. I won't go into more detail than that right now, but I'll say that if someone, for example, a child gets strep throat, and then their behavior changes after that, there's good data to say that that infection may have been the trigger. And if that's the case, treating the infection may actually be very helpful in the recovery there, because some of these infections, while the strep throat may have gone away, strep can live in the sinuses, it can live in the gut, it can live for a longer period of time and continue to cause problems. So what I look for in a case history is if someone says, hey, I was pretty, I wasn't stressed for my life. It wasn't lifelong depression. It wasn't lifelong anxiety. I was pretty good. I was pretty managing well in my childhood until a certain year when I was 14 or even when I was 25. And I got sick. I don't know if that's related, but then several months later, it doesn't have to be immediately, but several months later, there was some mental health changes. Things I used to not get stressed about, I started to become stressed about. So if the onset, I look for onset, when did the onset of the symptoms occur? And if there's not an obvious traumatic event or an emotional trigger, then a physiologic trigger may be at play, meaning an infection, an exposure to toxins, a change in the gut or gut function. So something as little as you got food poisoning, and the onset happened after that, you got a cold or a flu, and the onset happened after that, you got strep throat, and the onset happened after that, you just felt miserable, you don't know what you were sick with, and the onset happened after that, you got bit by a tick, and the onset happened after that. Any of those things would be initial things to look for as infection as a trigger, and that can point you to infection possibly being a root cause.
So you mentioned a couple things. So one, how would someone know that they got bit by a tick? And it's because it's not like a leech. The leech will stay on you, the tick won't, and you can like identify that this is the challenge. And then some of the issues that you just mentioned, during this time frame, I was cool. Then when I got 14 or I had this infection is when my mood changed. So that kind of logically for me would say, these are some areas that you can logically look at to determine that, oh, this is the shift and this is when I need to go see someone. I really don't have like a long-term depression. It's like a temporary one. And then are these the things that you guys work in your clinic? And is this the same stuff that you train the doctors on? Because guys, if you don't know, he's going to talk about that. He has a clinic, and then he has an institute that he trains doctors, because most doctors don't get into all of this. They just know how to take care of the immediate emergency. Am I correct? If I'm wrong, correct me.
Yeah. And doctors do a good job at trying to look at the psychiatric drugs and the counseling, but where we don't see a lot of doctors educated in is how to look for root causes like infections, toxins, gut dysfunction. And these things are big. They're big. And what I do in my clinic is we'll do testing like Lyme, like tick-borne and co-infections testing that tests for Lyme disease, that tests for other chronic infections like Babesia and Bartonella. Bartonella, it sometimes is called cat scratch fever. We know it can come from cats. We know it can come from dogs. We know it can come from a tick bite, and people might not remember or recall a tick bite. And it doesn't always have in Lyme. Usually there's this bullseye rash, but not always. And in other infections, there isn't always that bullseye rash. And even in Lyme, there isn't always that bullseye rash. So people might not know that. So if they've spent time outside in nature, that would be another thing, especially in Lyme endemic areas, or areas with lots of ticks would be another one. But even that, people on the West Coast, all the way in California, in the Bay Area, there's a lot of Lyme and ticks there. So people don't always know where that endemic area is. So I would say that what we do in the clinic is we test for antibodies against infections. So we'll look for inflammation resultant from toxins. We'll look for infections. We'll look for gut dysfunction. And if we see those present, then we'll target treatment there. And that might seem roundabout, like, why are you doing that if I'm depressed? But actually, there is good evidence. There is good actual research linking these problems. And we know the gut to the vagus nerve connection to the brain makes a big deal. Diet can play a big role. Medications can play a big role. There are a number of things that can play a big role beyond just psychiatric medications, and counseling as options. So I want to encourage people, there are more options. And what I train doctors on is the same. How do we look for these underlying root causes that are often missed? Because I'm not the conventional doctor you're going to come to for your first time. You've usually gone and ruled out the normal conventional things. And then I'm the one who comes in to try to figure out and help with what are some of the things that might have been missed.
Right. Hey guys, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back with Dr. Miles, I want him to talk about some quick and easy ways you can kind of detect if you are having inflammation challenges. And we all know when we have brain fog, but some of y'all don't want to acknowledge it. So I want him to kind of help y'all out in a smooth way. All right, we'll be back in a quick moment.
Are you struggling with depression or anxiety, brain fog, or other issues that you feel are getting in the way of your quality of life, your ability to spend time with your loved ones, your ability to be social, your ability to feel like your life is worth living? If so, I've been there myself, and I'm so sorry. My name is Dr. Miles, and I have made it my mission to educate people about root causes for mental health issues. Please enjoy the broadcast and education. And if you'd like to find out more, you can visit medicinewithheart.com.
Hey guys, so I hope you enjoyed the break, and we are back with Dr. Miles. So I did ask him on the break to go over how you can determine if you have inflammation, brain fog, and then while we were talking over the commercial break, a question came up about COVID. So if you can wind all that in and kind of help you all out, because I know a lot of folks have it, but they don't realize they have it. And I know you can get inflammation when you have a sedentary lifestyle, but is that the only way you can get it? And brain fog, and how do you know you're totally over COVID? Like you were talking, you can have an infection and you think you're over it, but it's still in your system. Explain that, because that's kind of wild.
Yeah, happy to. So when it comes to COVID, I'll touch that first, where there's this ability for COVID to have someone to get COVID and then have a symptom that they didn't have before COVID that persists long after the infection. And this is often referred to as post-COVID or long haulers. And so fatigue is the most common of these, but there are others, and brain fog would be one of them, that a person can get new onset when they get sick with COVID, and it never goes away fully. It might get a little better, but never back to how it was prior to getting COVID. There are several theories for why this is occurring. And one of them is that COVID may be reactivating another infection. For example, Epstein-Barr virus. Many people have gotten mono as a kid, and then it can reactivate later in life. And that reactivation may be triggered by COVID. So there could be another infection that was latent or dormant or wasn't having a big impact that can become activated through getting COVID. And so that's one way that can occur. And another way is that it may be, and there's debate about this, but it may be that COVID itself may be having made changes in the body that persist longer term, or the virus itself may be sticking around longer term. And then being able to change the body's immune function, other things will be necessary in order to reverse back to the symptoms that weren't there before starting to get that COVID infection. So fatigue and brain fog are two big ones. Mood changes are another. It is possible that some brain structure or function changes can occur from COVID infection as well. There's research suggesting that it may cause what's called encephalopathy, which are changes into the brain structure, either because of neuroinflammation or because of an autoimmune attack against the brain structure. When it comes to inflammation, how do you know if you have inflammation? Well, there are lots of causes for inflammation. And inflammation, if you're in chronic pain, aches and pains, that you would take a an anti-inflammatory drug for. If you'd take a Tylenol, if you'd take an Advil because you have pain, usually there's inflammation that goes with that pain, unless it's an acute injury, like you just injured yourself. But if it's chronic, if you're chronically feeling like, oh, I have a lot of pain, that would be a sign that there's inflammation that's present. And when there's inflammation present systemically in the body, we also know that the brain can be inflamed. Neuroinflammation is the term for it in medicine. Your brain can be, I like to say on fire is a good way to think about it. Brain on fire, your nerves on fire, to where when your body is showing signs of pain, you may also be having in your brain things occurring, what are called cytokines, which are inflammatory proteins, can actually change things in the brain that can lead to your mood changing, that can lead to brain fog. How do you know if you're brain fogged, though? Because some people just say, well, I'm getting older, I'm not remembering things as well. And really, there's the early signs of mild cognitive impairment are largely they're misunderstood by most people, and even a lot of doctors and practitioners. The brain should be sharp and clear and able to focus, and that does change eventually, but not as commonly as people think. If you're in your 30s or 40s or even 50s or 60s and you're starting to see your memory decline, if you're starting to see you're forgetful, you're not knowing how to bring up the right word, you're feeling like, oh, what's that word, where's that thing, those are signs that really there's something going on in the brain. There may be some brain on fire, some inflammation. There may be some of these underlying infectious causes. So if your brain doesn't feel clear, if you're not able to come up with the words that you want to come up with and remember things well and be able to focus, then that is a sign that there may be some issue with brain fog there.
So is it possible, because a lot of times when people in their later years, they'll associate that with dementia. So with everything you just shared, is that possible that they could have dementia, or it's just a collaborative amount of different things going on in their body that they need to come in and get tested for? And if that is the case, if I'm correct, do you guys do like a home test that they can do before they schedule something with you? Do you work with people via Zoom or only in your office? How would they know I got dementia, or no, I got, inflammation that's triggered by, A, B, C, D, E, F, G?
Yeah. And that's hard because the signs of mild cognitive impairment are often signs that there's an Alzheimer's or dementia process that's already begun, but it's at the early phases. And many times it will progress, but that doesn't change that some of the underlying root causes for dementia, Alzheimer's, for these cognitive impairment issues are the same as what we're talking about and mental health issues as well. There's a big overlap, actually, when we look at the research behind, for example, something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is these aspects of the brain that relate to what's called neuroplasticity, the ability to create new neurologic pathways. Impairments in that cause both mental health issues and cognitive decline issues. So there is some overlap. And how I work with people, I do often work via Zoom. I'm in Colorado locally, so people can come in Colorado in person or Zoom across the country. And then what we'll do is we'll have people do a combination of testing, usually some blood tests, some research validated questionnaires, sometimes a stool test or a breath test, a urine test, and they'll send them the kits. They'll do them at home, or they'll get a blood draw phlebotomist close to them to draw their blood. And then we'll get the results from the lab and be able to interpret those results and help people to be guided through the process. There are also some things that people can do on their own too, without having to go through all the lab testing, if you'd like me to cover those.
Yeah, real quick. And then will you tell people how they can get in touch with you? And then briefly, the 2 books that you have written already, do they cover the areas that we've been discussing now that may help them?
Yeah. So a place to start is looking at an honest self-assessment for things that might actually be inflammatory in nature. excess alcohol, lots of sugar, lots of things that you might know aren't great for you, sedentary lifestyle, you're not moving, exercising, lack of sleep, to really start to assess on your own those areas. And if it doesn't make sense to go searching after these infections and these complex issues if you haven't already done some basics on your diet and your lifestyle and your sleep. So the first step is look at, do you have some degree of work on your diet, work on your lifestyle, work on your sleep, work on your stress. And that's a really important place to start before seeking out fancy testing and things like that, because some stuff can just resolve by addressing those basics. So basics first. In terms of if you have done the basics, you do want some additional support. My website is medicinewithheart.com. The clinic, Medicine with Heart, has blog articles. So those are freely accessible. You can go on, you can read more on the blog. If you do want to ask about what working in the clinic looks like and the additional support involved in that, you can book a discovery consultation on the website free of charge. There's a complimentary consultation with one of my staff members who can talk to you a little bit about what the clinic is and how it works and if it might be a fit for you. Then when it comes to the books, I have a book called Stress Resilience, and that one is helpful on covering the basics. It doesn't talk about these root causes of mental health issues, but it does provide the baseline of an aspect of how the nervous system becomes dysregulated and how you can actually do some things to change stress. And sometimes that's enough to deal with some of the mental health challenges before going into all these root causes and all these medical stuff. So stress resilience is a great way to start to get that foundational level. And then again, if you still feel issues, the blog has extra resources and you can find out more about the clinic as well that way.
And the books are also, the links for those are on your site or on Amazon?
Amazon is where you can find the book. So, and then there's a place where you can get the first chapter on the website as well for free.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on to the show, Dr. Miles. It has been a pleasure, you guys. He gave you guys a lot of good nuggets on the root causes of mental health, where you can go if you feel that you've done all of the basics as he has explained and you still don't feel that you're at your best. Please reach out to Dr. Miles. And if you guys want more information like we just covered today, want to remind you guys, we broadcast every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on WYTV7.org. As usual, it has been a pleasure and I love you guys. And thank you, Dr. Miles, for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Sandy. It's been an honor.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.